Hello, everyone. I'm going to get started in a few minutes here. Just want to get some stuff situated. Wait for a few people to get on. For those who don't know, my name is Matt Gordon, and I'm the host of the Hidden Hockey Podcast. The focus of the podcast is focused on international hockey as well as the NHL Draft and prospects. If you haven't watched the first two episodes, I encourage you to do so. I'm trying a new format this time. I'm actually going live, and should be interesting to see how it goes. If I don't get any views, whatever, I don't get any views, but just testing out a few things. Want to see if you guys like the content, and if so, feel free to let me know. Feel free to leave any comments here in the live section as well. Look forward to hearing some of your feedback from the live chats, and I'm going to get started very shortly. All right, I'm going to get started now. Okay, so starting out with the 2022 NHL Draft, it was quite the draft. Obviously, a lot of teams took a lot of swings and made some interesting moves. I gotta say. So starting off with the first overall pick, a lot of people had presumptive number one Shane Wright as being in the first pick, and as you can see there, he clearly had his drop down to 4. Not sure if there was some interview issues or some maturity issues that maybe were there. A lot of scouts had said that his play away from the puck was not the strongest, especially in the second half of the season. He did not have a strong World Juniors either. I do think the concerns are a little bit overblown, but it was interesting to see that Juraj Slafkovsky was able to claim the number one overall spot for the draft. So with Juraj, you're getting a guy who's 6'4", 225 pounds, a massive human being. Led up the Olympics, was actually the Olympics MVP, and was also just a really important piece of a lot of the international hockey that was had for Slovakia, as they were able to claim their first medal at the Olympics. I'm curious to see how he adjusts to the National Hockey League. I do think there's going to be a bigger adjustment period than people realize. I'm not the biggest fan of Juraj Slafkovsky. I think, to me, I would rather see him in Finland. I don't think he's pro or NHL ready, rather, next year. I think there's some time and some things that have to be worked through. But I'll be curious to see what goes on from there. And then New Jersey comes and really shocks us and gets the second overall pick. And instead of the thought now that Slafkovsky's off the board, a lot of people thought he was headed to New Jersey. But they go with another Slovak, and Simon Nemec. Simon had some unprecedented, statistics and did some things that we never really seen in the Slovakian Pro League. So he never really had a precedent. But his overall play obviously got him to where he was, especially with some strong playoffs down the stretch there for playing for HK Nitra. It was very interesting to see him go second. I think looking at the center depth of the New Jersey Devils, having guys like Jack Hughes and Nico Hischier, they decided they wanted to go a little bit more for need as opposed to the BPA, which is usually not what you do with the second overall pick, and they drafted Simon Nemec. Simon Nemec is an interesting player. He's got really high offensive upside. I thought, to me, he was clear and far away the best defenseman in this draft. To me, I think he's a little more NHL ready than Slafkovsky. I would still, in my opinion, I think he's more of an AHL guy right now. He needs some time to really kind of get into the North American ice, really get an understanding of how his offensive skills are going to translate, and see where he goes from there. I think there's some real legitimate top 4 upside with Simon Nemec. It should be interesting to see what he does going forward. The number 3 overall pick was Logan Cooley. Logan Cooley, to me, I think was really overvalued throughout the draft process. I wasn't the biggest fan of his season this year. I got multiple viewings of him, probably 8 or 9 viewings, and every time I came away with wanting more from him. I personally had him ranked 5 or 6. I didn't really see him as being a guy who, to me, was that much better than Shane Wright or Urash for that rather. It'll be curious to see where he goes, and he's in an interesting landing spot in Arizona where they're not going to have a ton of pressure on him. He's going to go to the University of Minnesota next year and play on that loaded team and try and go for a national championship and a Big Ten title. I think he's got some interesting tools, and I think it's one of those things where he may play a year in college, and then after a year in college, he might be ready to go to the pros. And if he is at that case, I think they'll obviously bring him over to Arizona and really give him the opportunity to get a top 6 role there in 23, 24. An interesting guy, though. I think, if you're interested in him as well, for those that are following into deeper classes, his cousin, LJ Mooney, he's a 2007 born. He plays for the Pittsburgh Pens Elite U16 program next year. That's a kid who I think could be a top 3 or top 2 pick in his draft year, which is 2025. Really love that kid's game. Very fast. To me, he's one of the more exciting prospects coming up in American hockey, and very little people know about him right now. So obviously we go to number 4 with Seattle, and they went ahead and took the obvious pick in Shane Wright. Shane, to me, I think is going to be able to play in Seattle for day one. A lot of people think that maybe he should go to the OHL because of his missed year of development. I'm of the opinion that it doesn't really make sense for him to go to the OHL. I think he's done everything he can in the OHL. And I think there's a lot more that he can learn at the National Hockey League level. He's a smart guy. He's going to be able to focus and really get himself going in a way that makes him more productive, I feel like, even at the National Hockey League level. I don't see him having a hard adjustment period. I look to him. A lot of people compare him to Patrice Bergeron. I think it's a little unfair. But I do see him as a really high-octane, high-offensive guy who, could really bring it in the defensive zone as well. I think there's some real legitimate first-line upside with him. I see him as a 1C. A lot of people don't. But I'm of the opinion that he's going to continue to, ride the status that is his exceptional status that he earned when he was 15 years old. And I don't see why he can't be a really high-end offensive player and a really high-end forward in the National Hockey League. And that could be in the very near future as well. Number 5, Philly went with a player that, to me, I think screams prototypical Philadelphia Flyers and Cutter Gauthier. I'm not the biggest fan of Cutter Gauthier. I think, he's another guy like Cooley in my viewings. I did not get a strong viewing of him either. I can honestly say that the most I've noticed him was in the physical end of games. He was very, very strong on pucks, and he was very deliberate in what he did with pucks as well. I thought his puck pursuit was, to me, the strongest part of who he was as a player. I didn't see the skating that, others saw. I thought there was, there's some issues there. I'll be curious to see what he does at Boston College. I think he's a guy who's going to need some development time, maybe a couple years. But as soon as Philly made the pick, I immediately went, that makes sense. And it fits a lot with their system as well. Number 6, we go to David Jiricek for Pilsen in the Czech Hockey League. To me, Jiricek, he had some warts in his game, but he also got hampered by injury. Surprised to see him go at 6. I honestly thought maybe a team would have taken a swing at him earlier, due to the defensive nature of the draft and the perceived depth in defensemen in this draft. David, to me, I thought of the World Juniors did a pretty good job, before he got hurt. He had a really good game against Canada. Obviously the leg injury hampered the second half of the season, but he came back and apparently was really strong. I don't know if I see the high-end offensive game that others do. To me, Jiricek is a guy who's just a big body that screams prototypical scout, loved guy, because he's 6'4" and, 210, but nobody heard about him before this year. So, to me, it's a pick I would question, honestly. And I know a lot of people are going to look at me backwards by saying that, but I'm of the opinion it wasn't as strong of a defensive class as everybody said it was. And to that point, we're going to go to 7 with the Chicago Blackhawks. They went ahead and they took Kevin Korchinski, who I'd like to call Dennis Cholowski Jr. To me, he is an identical profile to Dennis Cholowski, a high-end skater that, had some offensive ability in his draft year. And before that, really struggled to produce any offense and also just grew into his body a little bit more. That's exactly the profile that Dennis Cholowski had. coming to the National Hockey League. And as you've seen with Dennis Cholowski, he has bounced around, not due to his work ethic or anything, just due to the fact that he just couldn't get, what he needed to done in the National Hockey League. So it's going to be an interesting dynamic with Chicago. They went ahead and they traded that pick. I believe that was the pick that they got for Alex DeBrincat. And Alex DeBrincat went ahead and went to Ottawa, which I feel like Ottawa won that trade. And then we moved to 8, and my heart team, the team that I'm wearing right now, the Detroit Red Wings, went ahead and selected Marco Kasper from Rogla in the Swedish Hockey League. To me, Marco Kasper was one of the more underrated prospects in this draft class. He first heard about him when he was about 13, 14, playing in the Austrian junior leagues. As a stat watching guy, I kind of went in and looked at his stats and just was blown away by the fact that he was scoring well in advance of kids his age. He's continued to develop and go to Sweden and show that he's committed. Kind of similar to like a Yaroslav Slavkovsky moved to Finland. It's the same type of story. Both guys are incredibly disciplined. They work hard and they're great character guys. I like the pursuit that Marco Kasper has. I think he's very deliberate, but he's also very smart in the way he plays. Very good offensively and as well as defensively. I think there's some untapped offensive potential with Marco Kasper. Defensively, when he gets into the zone, it's fun to watch him. I think there's a lot of different things he does really, really well, and he does a lot of the little things really, really well, as the cliche goes. But to me, it's a big day for Austrian hockey as well as for Slovakian hockey. The fact that they're able to get another top 10 pick, another Marco top 10 pick through the draft is super important. And I think there's a lot to like there with Marco. I think to me, he fits in as a 2C under Dylan Larkin. And I think there's a lot to like there. And it was a smart pickup by Stevie. And to me, I thought Detroit was one of the winners in the draft, in my opinion. So let's go to 9. The Buffalo Sabres with their first pick, first of 2, I believe, in the draft. Came into the first round with Matthew Savoy. Matthew Savoy was a guy who came in with a lot of hype, similar to Shane Wright. Nearly got exceptional status himself, but was denied due to the fact that he wanted to go NCAA. I really like Matt Savoy's game. I don't care that he's 5'9". I think he's really quick. I saw Corey Prodman put something out about his skating not being at a pro level, which is probably the most laughable take I've seen from a scout with as much experience as he does. Matt Savoy, to me, is one of the best skaters in this class, regardless of edge work, acceleration, speed, all the above. Matt Savoy is going to be a guy who translates really well in the National Hockey League, and people are going to be kicking themselves in a few years realizing that he was a 9th overall pick and 8 teams passed him up. I really like what he brings to the table, and he's going to come in, and I can honestly see him being a 30 to 35 goal scorer. One of my favorite picks in the top 10 of this draft as well. And then we go to 10, Pavel Minchikov from the Saginaw Spirit, one of the 3 Russian-born guys that were picked. He was unique in the fact that he stayed over North America during COVID, and he played for Saginaw and also sat out the year that the OHL didn't play due to the COVID outbreak. Minchikov, to me, he's interesting. I think, to me, he was the second best defenseman in this draft. I wasn't a massive fan of his game, but I understood why people liked him. I understood the appeal. He was a good skater, very deliberate in what he did, smart with the puck, really handled himself well, and also had, quite a bit of physicality as well. And I thought he brought a lot more to the overall output there. And I think he'll fit well with a guy like Jamie Drysdale. Different complementary skill sets, but still able to work with each other. I think that was a really smart pick by Pat Verbeek and the Anaheim Ducks, and a great job by their scouting staff to identify that. Number 11, we go to Connor Geekie, another Winnipeg Ice guys, teammate of Matt Savoy. Connor has been known on the scouting circuit for a while as well. Interesting guy, to say the least. He's a big dude. He's about 6'4", about 210, I believe. His skating is that of an issue. A lot of people like to compare him to Joe Thornton. I think that's also an unfair comparable. But he's an interesting guy. I think, if he gets under a skating coach, he works with somebody like a Laura Stam or a Barb Underhill, really works on his skating and really gets towards where he needs to be. I think there's a lot to like there. with a guy like Connor Geeky. 12 and 13, the Matejchuk pick from Columbus was an interesting one. Really like what they brought to the table there with, bringing in some high-end offense. And clearly Columbus thought defense through this draft process. They really drafted a lot of defensemen, and that was interesting to say the least. Number 13 would be Frank Nazar. Frank Nazar, to me, was the best kid in the development program this year. I thought, honestly, I saw him I think I had him at 4 on my mock. Very good pick by Chicago. I thought it was one of the few good moves they made during the draft was getting a guy like Frank Nazar. He's going to go to the University of Michigan, and he'll go and dominate. I think he's a really, really fun player to watch. Reminds me a lot of Dylan Larkin. Really got a great puck pursuit, but I think he's also incredibly elusive. I've never seen a prospect get as many breakaways as he does because he's just so good at understanding, weaknesses in coverage, and he exploits it really well based on his speed and his hands. 14, we got with Winnipeg. Winnipeg goes with continues with the Michigan pipeline and goes with Rutger McGroarty. Rutger had his up and down moments. He was really highly thought of coming out of the Oakland Junior Grizzlies program. And then he ended up going to the under 18 and under 17 team, expected to be a leader, and it took him a little bit before he became a leader on that team. It was interesting to say the least to watch him grow, and he showed some flashes. I really think he's an interesting guy, and I think Winnipeg was a great landing spot for him as well. Number 15, you go to Vancouver and go with Jonathan Lekaramaki. Jonathan Lekaramaki, to me, I had him at 3. I really, really highly value this kid's ability. Incredible skill. Great hands. I know you're looking at the stat totals, 26 games and 9 points. I don't think it does enough justice for how good this kid is as a hockey player. He just continues to score goals. To me, he was one of, if not the best shots in this draft. I thought he would go a lot higher than 15, as I clearly stated. But he's an interesting guy as well. I think he's going to come to the NHL sooner rather than later. I don't know if it's this year, but it'll be interesting to say the least. Number 16, Noah Ostlund, teammate of Lekaramaki. Got some time with him in the pros, but really played at the under 20 level in the Super Elite League, or what they call now the J20 National. Really dominated the junior circuit. A nice pick by Buffalo as well. I thought Buffalo had a really good job throughout this draft. Interesting guy. I didn't have him that high, in all honesty, but it was somebody who I understood being picked at 16, being a pretty decent pick. And then from there, I'm just going to go into some highlight picks that I really liked. Joachim Kamel at 17. Joachim, to me, was another guy who should have been in the top 10. Slipped a lot. I thought was unfairly characterized for being too short at 5'9.5". But when you watch him, he played bigger than 5'9.5". I thought his skill was evident. I thought his skating was really good. To me, he had one of the better hockey senses in the draft. I would argue that it's even better than Logan Cooley, in all honesty. I think there's a lot to like there. One of the better stories I thought coming out of this draft was Ivan Miroshnichenko. For those who don't know, he was diagnosed in February with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Fought through his cancer diagnosis, and now has ended up being a first-round pick in the National Hockey League. A lot of people saw him as a top 5 guy coming into the year and the years prior. Obviously, the diagnosis and COVID didn't do him well. He also had some unfortunate circumstances when it comes to his development process. Was often told that he was out of shape and wasn't, handling things before the diagnosis. And then he also tried to come over to North America and play for the Muskegon Lumberjacks. His visa was denied during COVID, and he was not able to come over. So he was kind of blacklisted for a little bit as well. So he really had some really screwed up development conditions, and it sucked to see it. It was really too bad. And then finally, I'm going to touch on a couple more people before I go over the overall draft. To me, number 30 with Brad Lambert. Brad Lambert was a guy who I was very surprised to see drop the way he did. I saw him, honestly, as being the number 1 overall pick 16, 18 months ago. And all the skill in the world, but none of the tools. He didn't have the ability to really utilized his tools in the way that he should have. Great shot, good hands, phenomenal skater, one of the best skaters in this draft. But the problem with him is in between his ears. I think, you go through 3 different teams in 18 months. To me, that's a you problem, not a team problem. It just doesn't make sense why a kid that talented has such an issue. From what I understand, there's rumors out there that, his dad was pretty involved in that, that kind of process and stuff like that. So that's the case. That's just the case, unfortunately, of hockey parents coming over and doing more than they should. It's too bad. But I really, if everything comes together for Brad Lambert, I think he's one of the better players to come out of this draft class. I think there's a lot to like there. 4 points for him in 25 games this year was just such a disappointment for the Pelicans. Just not a strong showing this year, and he should have done a lot better. But he's in a great spot with Winnipeg. I think Winnipeg's going to give him a lot of patience. They got a lot of high-end forwards that they can work with. And, they've worked with guys like Christian Vesalainen before and Patrick Laine, so they're very familiar with the Finnish mentality, if you will. And it'll be interesting to see what he does there. And then finally, the last guy I want to touch on for the first round is Isaac Howard, part of that loaded 04 class at the development program that drafted, 6 guys in the first round. Isaac Howard, to me, I thought he was right under with Nazar. I thought Nazar and Howard were the 2 best guys in the development program. Every time I watched them, they both were very impactful on the ice. Both had really great offensive instincts and abilities, and they played well off each other. They often played with each other. And both of them, to me, had very, very high-end, offensive instincts. And I really liked what they brought to the table and what they did this year overall. So, yeah, I mean, going through the draft, I thought some of the winners, I'm going to go through and select here. Some of the winners to me in the draft were, I honestly thought Detroit did a great job in managing their picks. Starting in the second round, Seattle with Jagger Firkus, really high-end kid. Seattle did a really good job as well. I thought they were one of the more better drafting teams in the draft as well. And then, Dylan James, I've watched him numerous times and actually watched him a couple times during the playoff run they had and was very impactful throughout the game. Really great skater, very demonstrative, really did a lot of things very, very well. And I was glad to see him do as well as he did. I think, to me, he was a very, very apropos pick for Stevie Y and the Wings. Really like what he brought to the table there. Paul Lewinsky was another guy who I really liked from Chicago. That was another decent pick that they made. Noah Warren, watched a lot of him. That's a kid who I feel like is a really projectable kid in the National Hockey League. Like what he did, in terms of his draft stock. I really liked what he brought overall. We can go on and on. There's a ton of guys here on the list. David Goyette's a guy I really liked as well for Seattle. Gleb Trikazov. I thought Carolina did an excellent job in this draft, drafting guys that really fit what they needed to fit, for their scheme. Minnesota as well. Judd Brackett's, he's a whiz. He really is a smart guy. That I really, really think there's a lot of value in what he's done for them. Drafting guys like Carson Lambos, Jesper Wallstedt, Ryan O'Rourke. They got, Marco Rossi. They got Marat Kuznetsov. They got a lot of guys that are going to be really high-end players. And, it's the best is yet to come. I mean, they just, as I recorded today, they just got rid of Cam Talbot for Philip Gustafson, who's another young goalie, just turning 24. And very interesting prospect as well. I think he's a guy who you could see as being a backup going forward for them, not only now, but in the future. One of my secret favorites was the guy at 52, Dmitry Buchelnikov. Caught him in a few viewings while originally looking for Matvei Michkov, who I'm going to get into a little bit more later. Really high-end offensive player. I thought one of the more underrated guys, and the fact that he, despite the fact he was an overager, I was really stunned to not see this kid ranked in very many outlets at all. I had him actually ranked higher than where he was drafted. I had him at 27. I had him as a first-round guy because I truly believe in his upside. I think there's a lot to like there, and was very surprised to see him drop the way he did. Then, the back half of the second round, we go to a guy like Lane Hudson. Lane Hudson's a guy who I was very impressed with. I thought there was a lot to like there. Despite the fact that he's a shorter guy, he's only about 5'8", but he really brings it every game. You watch him, and he's just so determined and so vigilant in how he handles pucks in pursuit. And there's a lot to like. I really like what he brings to the table. I think there's a lot that we can see translated in the National Hockey League. I look at him like a Torrey Krug. I think there's a lot of potential there for him. Now going into the third round, a lot of guys I like. Ty Nelson was a guy I really thought should have been drafted higher. Alex Perevalov, again, another Carolina pick. Really liked what he brought to the table. Quinn Finley was a guy who he impressed me in viewings. Liked what his overall game had and what he did for guys on this team. I thought he was one of the better Madison Capitals. When I would watch games for them, I thought he was excellent in that regard. Moving through here, another guy who was quite polarizing. You're going to look at his stats and go, wow, why the hell was he a third-round pick? Was Jordan Dumais. Plays for the Halifax Mooseheads. I didn't, unfortunately, get a lot of live viewings of him this year. Got a lot of highlight tape stuff where I viewed him, but hard to pass up on offensive skill sets like that, right? You know, you don't see too many guys putting up 110 points in their draft year. Obviously speaks to his offensive ability, and to me, that's clear and far and away NHL translatability, in my opinion. You put up that many points, you know, even if you get half of those points, you're going to be looking at a guy who could produce offense in the National Hockey League. The issue with him apparently is skating. I've yet to see that personally in the clips that I've watched of him, but you know, maybe that's something he can work on going forward. An interesting guy to say the least, though. Those of you wondering, like, why are you not talking about goalies? This was not a very strong draft for goalies at all. I would argue that none of the guys drafted I think are going to hit the league. I just don't see it. I really don't. Even the guy who was drafted second, Tobias Leonin, he's from Finland. Or Nicholas Koko was another guy that was drafted in the second round. Both of those guys, to me, are the closest I feel like that could potentially get into the NHL at some point in time. But honestly, it's tough to say. I just don't see the upside that everybody else does. Not really sure where that upside comes from, in my opinion. And Leonin came into the combine and was quite heavy. It was about 6'4" and about 230. Granted, it might have been a lot of muscle, but that's a really big goalie. It's almost Freddie Anderson-like. And I don't know if his mobility is at that level, to be honest. I don't see him as being, you know, Freddie Anderson's big, but he can move just as good as any goalie in the National Hockey League. I don't see that same mobility in a guy like Leonin. You know, going into the fourth round, a couple of guys that I want to highlight. One guy in particular is Stephen Halliday, double overager guy, an 02 born, who, you know, when watching the Fighting Saints this year, he was clearing away their best player. Obviously, being that he's played in the USHL for 4 consecutive years, I think actually played 5 years. You know, he's gone on to break a lot of USHL scoring records. You know, the big thing for him, you know, it's not his size. He's 6'4" and about 220. A big kid. I don't see the skating issues. I think people really overblow skating. You can see it's a common thread that a lot of people knock these kids down for skating when I think there's almost too much scrutiny put on skating, I feel like. But that's a discussion for another day. Then we'll go into guys like, you know, 109 Columbus. I thought was one of the better drafting teams this year as well. They had a guy in Kirill Zenkov. This kid is, if people know who Elmer Soderblom is, for those who don't know, he's a Detroit Red Wings prospect, 6'8", about 250. So imagine a LeBron on skates. That's how big Soderblom is. And this Dolzenkov kid is right there with him. Very versatile kid. I think his skating is his biggest hang up. But it'll be interesting to see what he brings to the table. I really like what he does. You know, in the clips I've seen him, I think he's a really, really strong hockey player, somebody that you can really build around and do a lot with. And it's going to be curious to see, you know, what he does going forward. But very projectable guy, I feel like, in the National Hockey League. I don't like to, go too crazy as a size queen over guys that are huge. But when you're 6'8" and 250 pounds and you score 2 goals, one with a Michigan move and the other between the legs, there's some game there. There's some game that, probably should be talked about a lot more than it is. So it'll be interesting to watch those kids, get to where they are. Another sneaky pick again by Detroit, Amadeus Lombardi. He's for the Flint Firebirds. Got some clips of him. I haven't really watched him live, if I'm going to be honest. But, and what I watched, I really liked what he had. Very offensively gifted kid, good puck mover. I thought his passing ability was really impressive. He was very creative in how he had reads and how he examined reads. I really liked what he brought to the table there. A kid who I had pretty high before the injuries was Cruz Lucius. He's the brother of Chaz Lucius, who was a Winnipeg pick. I believe he was a first rounder as well. Cruz went in the fourth just due to the injuries. He's been battling it a lot between the COVID outbreak and 2 major injuries that he had. It brought a lot of turmoil to him and his overall development path. But if he gets on the right path, I think he's a guy who could be a really impactful guy out of this draft. Moving on to the 5th round now. Cedric Guindon is another guy too. I think he's going to be a guy who is going to be one of the better players in the OHL next year. So he's a guy to watch. And then going down in here, another guy I really liked was Vladimir Grudinin. Caught some clips of him. Really offensively gifted guy. Talented. The biggest thing for me is how well he moved the puck out of the defensive zone. He's a guy who clears pucks out very frequently and very effectively. Like what he brought in terms of, his overall hockey sense and his package in terms of his overall skills and what he does. Very safe player, very responsible player. Doesn't overpower you, but he's very, very deliberate in what he does. He's very smart at what he does. There was a lot to like there. 6th round, a kid who I think he's going to fall into some radars next year. Very savvy pick by Buffalo and Jake Richard. He was very, very offensively gifted. Coming into the USHL, I mean, was putting up some really unprecedented points in the North American Prospect Hockey League, which is, for those who don't know, it's the premier circuit for a lot of the Southeast U.S., Western U.S., very atypical, non-traditional American hockey hotbeds, if you will. He was very dominant in that. And then he came to the USHL and struggled a little bit, but then this year really came into his own. Really like what he brings to the table. I think there's a lot to like there. And then, going into some of these other picks, another guy who I had really high, I was surprised to see him drop this low, was a kid from Minnesota. His name was Servac Petrovsky, another Slovakian kid. I honestly had him as a top 60 guy. I would have thought for sure he was in the top 60. So it was a very, very good value pick for them to get him at 185. And then in the 7th round, just a few more guys. 202, you had Joel Radkovic Bernston. He plays for Frölunda in the under-20 program. Would have thought that was a Wings pick. We didn't end up drafting him, but interesting guy as well. Ben Strinden was a guy who I really liked in viewings as well. I thought he really did a lot for his stock, and good for him to get drafted. And then those are the ones that I'd seen out of here. So looking at the overall leagues and what guys came out of, obviously a country like Belarus, they had the last pick, and Ivan Zhigulov, goaltender for the Sherbrooke Phoenix. Interesting guy to say the least. Austria had a couple guys drafted. The other guy was Vincenzo Rohrer, playing the OHL this year. So for niche hockey countries, it's nice to see them getting into different guys and different players as well. So it was interesting to see. I'm going to stop sharing here, and I'm going to get more into just the overall stuff that we're going to talk about today. I'm going to share my other screen now, and going over what I believe to be some of the stronger guys in the 2023 draft. Here, let me share real quick. I'll share my screen now. You guys can see number one for me, far and away. And if it weren't for the Russia-Ukraine issue right now, this kid would absolutely, positively be the number one overall pick, and that's Matvei Michkov. Fascinating to talk about this kid. I think to me, he's the most gifted 16-year-old kid I've ever seen play the game. I've watched guys like McDavid. I've seen clips of Crosby. To me, Matvei Michkov is the most dominant kid I've ever seen at 16 years old. He made the KHL look pretty good. You know, he was very, very impressive in the KHL as a 16-year-old kid. No reason why he shouldn't be a regular player in the KHL next year. He dominated the under 20 league, 4 years younger than him in a really, really strong league in the MHL, mind you. Was scoring nearly a goal per game. Really impressive player. Really like his overall, input and what he brought to the table. When I rank these kids, I'm ranking them purely on what I believe to be their upside, regardless of their personal situation. So that's why I have Michkov at 1. Common sense would put Bedard at 1, and I would agree with that. But in terms of their overall impact and what their potential impact is, I had to rank Michkov over Bedard. But it's not a slim margin, but it's not a large margin either. I think there's a healthy balance between the two, but those two, in my opinion, are far and away the best in the class. So we're going to go to, obviously at 2, I have Connor Bedard. Connor Bedard to me is another kid who, both of these guys, I think, are capable of 60 goals in a year. No questions asked. Both of them are incredibly, incredibly gifted hockey players. Guys that really bring a lot to the table. Love what they bring in terms of their mindset. Very impressive in terms of what they overall approaches to their games. Connor is going to be a guy to me. If he plays in August in the World Juniors, I mean, he's going to light it up. There's going to be a lot of guys who are going to wish he was not there if he's going. I wouldn't be surprised if he put up 15 points. Honestly, he was on pace to do that in the World Juniors already. And that was with probably what you would argue is a stronger tournament. You're going to have some guys that aren't going to play in this just because their teams are going to be scared to have them play. I don't know if a Shane Wright's going to play. I don't know if a guy like Yaro Slafkovsky is going to play. Simon Nemec might not play. They're going to lose a lot of different guys due to teams not really wanting them to get hurt before the season starts. But Connor is an incredible hockey player. I would argue that he's just as good as McDavid in terms of where he's at as a 16-year-old kid. Really love his overall game. I think there's a lot to like there. The third overall guy right now for me is Adam Fantilli. Plays at the Chicago Steel in the USHL program. He'll be going to the University of Michigan as well. Very, very talented kid. To me, I really like his overall skill set. I think he's going to do a lot of damage in the NCAA next year. Really like his overall output. Just really gifted offensively, great hands. Just a big body too. I mean, he gets into spots in the corner and just he'll light some people up. And that's not easy to do as a 16-year-old in the USHL. He might be the most talented 16-year-old that the league's seen. And it's going to be more to come, obviously. There's a lot of really good, talented kids that are coming through the USHL nowadays. And it'll be curious to see what we do from a development standpoint in America with these players. And it was very interesting to watch that. Another kid who you may not know, but I really like his overall game is Dominic Peter. Plays for the Czech. He was playing in Finland and then moved back to the Czech under 20 league. I would have to think he's going to get some pro time next year in the Czech league. Should be interesting to see what he does overall. I really like his game. Really like the approach he has as well. Another high-end offensive guy. The other guys who I'm going to go down on the list, I'm a little less familiar with, but I'm ranking them in terms of hype, and I look forward to getting some viewings on these guys this year. Another guy is Brendan Yeager. He plays out of the Western Hockey League. The Western Hockey League, by the way, is going to have a loaded class for this pick. I mean, for the 2023 draft. You got guys like Bedard. Brendan Yeager is going to be a kid. Another kid who I'm going to touch on in a minute is Riley Hyde. Riley and Brendan Yeager both played with each other before they hit the WHL, played with each other all their lives. Very talented kids, Kane Zimmer is another late born 04 kid who I think is a really talented player. Andrew Crystal is another kid. So there's 5 right there in my top 10 that are from the Western Hockey League. And then you add on a guy like Matthew Wood, who could have been in the Western Hockey League, but played in the BCHL instead. A lot of talent out west, and you're going to see a lot more. Another guy who I'm not going to show in the list, but he's another guy who I think is really interesting is Logan Warmald. Plays for Kamloops, I believe. Really talented player as well. And so we move on to a guy like Cal Ritchie. To me, far and away the best OHL guy. Going to be a really talented player. I think him and Colby Barlow are both guys that are really impressive. Another guy there in Ethan Miedema. He played really well for Windsor as well. Should be interesting to see, what goes on and what they do from here. And there's some variability, obviously. We'll see what happens. But you can see the rest of my list there. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know what your thoughts are, as well as, an explanation on who these prospects are. There's a lot to like with these guys. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen here. And I'm going to come back here. Just any other questions that come through, I'll feel free to answer them. As always, thanks for joining us for this. I'm really excited to do these live formats. I think there's going to be a lot of intrigue and different things that we can talk about. And I think I prefer this as opposed to the audio version that I've been putting out before. So thanks for joining me for the live stream. Feel free to watch it, at a later time. And I am excited to be able to produce these more. So I'm hoping to up the quality a little bit more. Hoping the sound is okay. Feel free to leave any feedback that you believe is good or bad. And really look forward to talking more about hockey with you guys. Thanks, and we'll see you. Bye.